Sorry about the fan in the background again, but it is just so damn hot today. I can't make a video without it. So if it ain't your thing, you might want to jump out, and I do apologise. But irregardless, I'm going to be making this video. So I do technically already have some gum in my mouth. I know. I'm sorry. It's an illegal move, but I've done it nonetheless. We're going to be chewing some extra white again today in this video. Let's get it out. Take another 2 pieces. That'll be 3 in total. So getting these 2 pieces, we're going to have a little chat today about a very special topic. Oh, it's tough. Alright. The thing about the white one, oh, it is like soaking mint into your mouth. It is burning. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a chat comparing Star Trek to Star Wars. Now, these are both tabletop role-playing game systems. We've got Edge of the Empire, Star Wars, and Star Trek Adventures. These are here just as props. So today, I wanted to just chat about the 2 franchises. I did a suggestion in an older video, older as if it was like months ago or weeks ago or years ago. It was like 2-3 days, where I mentioned about having like a connection to them both. That I originally liked Star Wars and then had like a whole Star Trek thing. And I wanted to have a little bit of a chat. Just talk a little bit about both of them. Some like experiences. Some reasons why I do and don't like certain elements maybe. I've tried to break this down a little bit. I haven't really thought about the answers too much because I didn't want it to feel programmed. And if my answers are not satisfactory, I can always do a bit more of an in-depth chat, but I'll be honest, I don't think anyone's really going to give a shit. Chances are, anyone who is watching this and actually wants to watch it is probably more interested in the sounds and the conversation, but you know, that's fine. So that's a little chat. So, Star Trek and Star Wars. Both of them are franchises that have had a big impact on me growing up. I'd say that Star Wars probably started that a lot sooner. I didn't even know how young I was when I first started watching Star Wars. But as far as I can remember, into the past, I used to have, do you know what, I think it might have even been on video, the old prequel movies, and then we obviously had the sequels, oh sorry, not the sequels, the original trilogy, that I had seen, but most of my experience as a kid was with the prequels, because that was just what was coming out at the time when I was a kid. So we used to watch that. I even remember. I don't really remember the release of Phantom Menace. I would think I was way too young for that. I don't actually remember the year that came out. I think it was '98, but that's a guess. Sorry if I'm scratching my nose. It's because my fucking facial hair keeps like itching my nose, and also the fan that is next to me is blowing my hair onto my face, so it's itchy. I'm not like wiping snot away or something. I just get like itchy nose from like hay fever and having long hair and facial hair. Alright, it's just a thing. I might be gross, but I'm not that gross. Anyway, yeah, so I don't really remember my first like memory of Star Wars, if I'm honest. But I'd say that it probably was since a very, very young age. And I don't remember, as I said, the prequel, Phantom Menace, or even Attack of the Clones coming out. But I definitely remember seeing the trailers for Revenge of the Sith. Crazy to think back now about that coming out. Gosh, that was crazy. Anyway, yeah, I remember seeing that. Obviously at that time there was no real cartoons or anything. To my knowledge, I don't think so, other than like the old, I think it was like a C-3PO one, or like with the droids and stuff. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I'm pretty sure that was like an old C-3PO series, which I never watched. But my dad always loved Star Wars, so he was pretty big on that. So yeah, right from like a youngster, I was watching Star Wars even, and then like when I was old enough, getting like some of the games like Battlefront and Battlefront 2, like the original ones, Squadrons, or like the equivalent was like X-Wing Fighter or something, not the new one, obviously, and like Jedi Knight and the Bounty Hunter one, Republic Commando, those old games, so much fun. So I grew up playing them, and then obviously sequels came out when I was an adult, and you know, I don't know, I'm not gonna like make this a video about the sequels and my feelings on them. I feel like I'm pretty vocal about my personal thoughts about them, but at the end of the day, you know, they existed, they happened, whether we agree to like them or not, they're part of the canon. It's time to just move on, you know. In time, maybe we'll look back at it fondly. I think there's more of a justification for criticism, because, you know, the prequel trilogy, personally, I think it's more like a passion project. And okay, yeah, there are faults about it, but because it was made with passion, it feels different. Whereas it's very clear with the Disney movies that it's about making money from a franchise, and you know, I think they've even admitted to like there wasn't like a direct through line, which even with prequels you can see there's a through line, right? And that's the reason it feels a little bit like, oh, like if it, I think I wouldn't take quite as much issue with it if it wasn't if it was still like thought out. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just feels very mismatched, I guess. But we could sit here all day and debate that. Either way, they happened, and I saw them. And then Clone Wars, which I didn't see until after I'd watched the movies again. I didn't watch them when it came out, other than like the odd episode. So I would say, you know, it's been with me that my whole life. It's been pretty impactful. In fact, I did a module in like year 8, which for international people, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but I'd have been about 13 or 14. Might have been 13 or 14. And we did a module in religious studies about mythology. And oh my god, it's a bit cringe. Everyone else was bringing like real myths. I listened to my dad, who was like, you know, Star Wars is based on mythology. So I brought in Star Wars. I talked about it. My teacher basically made fun of me in front of the class. The thing is, he didn't understand my point, which was that I wasn't saying like Star Wars is a real myth that happened. Like, first of all, myths aren't real anyway, so shut the fuck up. And secondly, that's not the point. You asked me to bring a myth in, and from my perspective, it's using the mythic hero trope. The storyline is a mythic hero. It's set up the story as a myth, but whatever. I get that it wasn't exactly on right, but you know, either way, making fun of a kid. What a dickhead. Anyway, getting all my trauma out now. So, that's my experience with Star Wars. Star Trek, I didn't start watching until I was, I think, 13 or 14 as well. Around about the same time, I believe. So basically, I had never seen it before then. I obviously kind of knew of it. Just thought it was like, oh, that's the thing that real nerds watch. Didn't have any knowledge about Star Trek. Then, we had to have our house fumigated, and so I went to stay in like a temporary flat with my dad, and we didn't have any internet. We had no internet, no TV. So the only thing, I mean, obviously the internet was like way different than it is now. There's no YouTube. I don't think there was YouTube at that time. I actually can't remember. But either way, like even then it wasn't like the YouTube that we watch now. So we didn't have anything. So we watched two things. We watched the box set of Ulysses 3000 or something, which is like the story of Ulysses, but done as if it was in space. It's quite interesting. It was a very old show. And the other thing we watched, actually there was two other things. One was Dinosaurs, which was like an old TV show about dinosaurs, but it was like a sitcom. You might know of it. It's got the voice actor from for Elmo, wasn't it, as the baby? I'm pretty sure. Sounds fucking identical if it wasn't. Anyway, this video is already getting very long. So I watched it with my dad then, because the other thing we watched was Star Trek. But not just any. He bought my first introduction to Star Trek was the series Star Trek Voyager, which came out at the mid-90s, I think, and ran, or early 90s through to the late 90s, and then kind of wrapped up for the 2000s, if I remember correctly. And there's a whole bunch of Star Trek shows, so that was my introduction. And I would say, you know, the later Treks are much different to the original. So my experience was more of the real sci-fi, like the real, more, I don't want to say serious, but like the more, it took itself a bit more seriously. And even the show recognises that. So I first had my experience with Star Trek watching it on box set. I watched the first season, and I was just addicted. I asked him to get it immediately, and we watched nearly the whole show. We got up to like season 4 or something, and that was when, you know, we could move back into the house. And my dad had already seen how much I loved it, and proceeded to buy the box set. And over the next few years, got me the box set for Deep Space Nine and for the original Star Trek. I wasn't a big fan of Deep Space Nine at the time as a kid, but as I got older, I started re-watching the other series, watched through Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and I watched the first 2 seasons of the original series, a couple of the movies, and obviously like the more recent stuff. The only Star Trek show I haven't watched so far is probably Prodigy, fucking hell, Prodigy. But the only reason that is the case is because it's on Paramount Plus, and I just never really got around to watching it. I only have watched the first season and a half of Strange New Worlds because, well, I was watching it on a Paramount Plus and then that ran out, so I never got to finish it. But I do intend to get it. Honestly, I'm debating getting Paramount Plus simply for Star Trek, which I don't want to do, but I want to watch Prodigy before it gets removed because, you know, I can't believe they're removing it, but that's another story. And I would say that ever since I started watching Star Trek, I don't know, I just started falling in love with that more than I did Star Wars. But the thing is, they're two completely different franchises. You know, Star Trek is like sci-fi through and through. It is science fiction. Star Wars is more space fantasy. I wouldn't really call it sci-fi. It's basically like fantasy in space, you know, and that's a bit rich, saying that Star Trek isn't, when you literally have like space elves, space orcs, you know, all of these above. But, you know, it doesn't feel like fantasy. And I think that's a big distinction between the two. Star Wars feels like something super fake, you know, like it's a fantasy. It's basically sword and shield, but in space. You know, lightsabers and guns. You got pirates that fly around in ships. And you know, everything feels like just playing like watching Lord of the Rings, but it's in space, kind of. And it doesn't help, you know, that it has that mythic storyline to begin with. But I like the lore in it. You know, I like the kind of the lore, and I think it's a great fantasy world to explore. And because of that, when you're playing it in a TTRPG like Edge of the Empire, it kind of feels like playing D&D in space, because it very much gives into that sort of trope of being a fantasy, and the shows are like that, I think. It's kind of like watching Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones if it wasn't so deadly in space. So that's my thoughts on Star Wars there. Star Trek is much more like a fantasy future, or like a good vision of the future. This is what humanity could be, because Star Wars is obviously, by definition, set in a galaxy a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Is a story, it's not real. But Star Trek feels like this could be our future. It's got humans from Earth, real cultures. It's from the future of our world that we live in, which Star Wars obviously isn't. And because of that, there's much more of a connection, I think, with it. Like, you can feel a connection with the story more in a certain way, because it feels like that could be our future. And yeah, I think that makes a big difference. It also makes it way more interesting, in my opinion. Maybe not more interesting, but interesting in a different way. To be able to look at it and go like, this is like the utopia of what we would want from the world, something to strive towards. I mean, Star Trek in its own right has been the foundation for a lot of like technology, to the point in which it's like, did Star Trek predict the future, when in actual fact it's more like technology is gone, we love that from fantasy things, or from like, fictional, not fantasy but fictional TV. We want to make it a thing, like the flip phone to the iPad to AI, you know, all of that is stuff that was predicted in Star Trek, and so it feels like you're growing towards that. It's very hopeful, and honestly, it's just kind of cool. I love like the way in which it's very different to Star Wars, which is obviously like sword and shield, whereas Star Trek is much more drama. It's basically like watching a drama show, certainly those original series, it's about very human stories rather than a big narrative, which is what Star Wars often feels like. So they are very different in that regard. So there are a couple of thoughts about the differences. A little bit about my experience with them. Just thought I'd talk about some of my favourite characters from each. So, obviously, you got Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker, just like such a great story arc all the way through from beginning to end through the Clone Wars. It's just one of the most satisfying stories. The whole Skywalker stuff, you know, expelling away the sequels, all feel very tightly knit, a really tight story, and beautifully done. Clone Wars really does tie it all together, and stuff with Ahsoka really wraps it up with a neat bow. I did a little video on Ahsoka as well if you want to check that out. Yeah. So that's a character I like. Anakin and Darth Vader. Big fan of Ahsoka as well. Just really enjoy the conceptualization of that character and the growth that they've gone through in the show. And the Clone Wars, just thought it was a real joy to watch. Really well written. Let me see if I can think of anything else. I feel like nothing's coming to mind. I think the difference in Star Wars is that obviously because they're movies rather than shows for the most part, your like connection with them is way more limited than when you watch like hundreds of hours of a series, you know. So I'd say like Obi-Wan, Anakin and Ahsoka are my like ones that I enjoy the most because there's so much to watch of them in Clone Wars that you really, really see a growth. And then when you flick it over to something like Star Trek, the dramatized element of it, the real like less about the situations and more about the characters, it certainly puts you in a position where you find yourself connected to the characters more, in my opinion anyway. I'd say like overall, if I were to kind of take all the series and begin to like funnel them down to some of my favourite characters, and I'll be honest, I feel like I've got more to say about Star Trek than Star Wars, simply because I just find myself like way more drawn to Star Trek now. I'd say most of them are from Voyager because, you know, I'll be honest, it's nostalgia. It's my first series that I watched. Always have a close a place in my heart. I'll keep it close to my heart. And I'll have no Voyager hate, you know, no Voyager hate. I'd say my favourite characters are the Doctor in Voyager because it just has an incredible arc. I think personally I enjoy it more than the Data arc. It is funny when you start to read into Star Trek shows how often they just reuse the same trope. Star Trek Next Generation had Data, who was an android who wanted to be more human. Deep Space Nine had Odo, who was a changeling who wanted to try and understand what it meant to exist. Basically, kind of a similar thing. You know, find out who he was. And then you had the Doctor in Voyager, who wanted to basically be a real person, but was programmed just as a hologram. I don't think there's really an example in Enterprise. The closest might be to Paul because she's the only non-human on board. But I don't really think that kind of counts. It's more like a cultural change rather than like basically a non-human or like inanimate entity who is beyond the idea of what is like sentient life, trying to come to terms with like being more human, etc. And as the core shows, you know, you look at those for the most part, the newer ones kind of take on different styles in their storytelling. So I'm not really counting them in terms of this, but yeah, I'd say, in my opinion, the Doctor is the best example of that. Probably personal taste. I just think him going like literally from I'm just a hologram to slowly being given more rights, because, you know, he needs to expand his programming because he needs to be online all the time now, and that means like, well, he doesn't want to have to be turned off. Like, what if someone like leaves sick bay and has to turn him off because he's a hologram? It's like a TV, you know. If you leave the living room, unless you've got like a smart TV, it's going to keep it on. And so he wants the ability to turn himself off, and that immediately gives him what's the word I'm looking for? Like agency as an entity, like to go, well, I can turn myself on and off. But after that, he starts, you know, wanting to develop a personality, and as the series goes on, like there's episodes about him having like the same rights as humans, another sentient biological life form. Some big questions about other holograms and stuff. It's really, really well done, and I think it's the best example. I really like Data, but then in Picard they basically make him a human, and it's like, you kind of ruined it. I really have a love and hate relationship with Picard. I think the first 2 seasons kind of suck. Third one's pretty good. It's decent. It's not perfect, like what I just mentioned, but it's way more in line with what the original was like. But I tell you, the one thing I really hate about that, I really, really hate, is the fact that, spoilers for Picard season 3 by the way, at the end of that season, Picard's son, he was like maybe partially coerced, but he made the active decision to go and like get himself assimilated, caused the death of thousands of people, probably like the trauma of even more, and also like probably irreparable bodily harm to more people as well. And then at the end, he faces no repercussions. In fact, he is fast-tracked through Starfleet Academy to get into a high-ranking position on a ship, right? Okay, maybe it wasn't a high ranking, but a decent ranking on the ship. Fast-tracked, because, and they even say that nepotism is what got them through, which completely destroys the point of the Star Trek universe. Like, all that sort of stuff is meant to not really exist. You know, it's supposed to be based on skill and virtue, and like, okay, so you have a name, and there's always going to be human instinct to be like, oh, you're the son of someone very famous, okay? But at the same time, like, they just kind of shoved it in the face at the end of like, yeah, he's got no repercussions, and he got through on nepotism. Yeah. Not happy about it, but personal taste. Anyway, this video's gone on very long. I feel like there's so much more I could talk about both of these franchises, but I thought I'd just do a little ramble about it, talk about a bit of the differences, some of my personal experiences with it. Maybe in the future do another one of these, talk a little bit about both, maybe one specifically. If you have any like particular interest or questions about it, I'd be happy to answer. If anyone is interested, who knows, you know, I'm sure there's more people like me out there. It's whether or not they end up seeing this video and enjoy it. Anyway, big thank you for sticking around if you're still here. I'm only doing this for got so many videos in the backlog. I've already uploaded a bunch at once with the hard launch, and got a few more in the pipework. Don't know what my schedule's gonna look like, how I want to do this. I want to do something regular, but I've got so many in the backlog. I don't think doing one a week is gonna be enough. So yeah, I'm gonna part ways here. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful night.